1977 was a landmark year for Seattle baseball. It marked the beginning of the Seattle Mariners. But the roots of Seattle baseball actually dates back nearly a century before the M's. Back in 1890, the one-year-old state of Washington started its first pro baseball franchise, the Seattles, part of a newly established Pacific Northwest League. In 1892, the Seattles won the league championship. Unfortunately, the league folded that same year. The beginning of professional baseball in the Northwest appeared to be over, until in 1894, one man stepped up to the plate.
The father of early Seattle baseball is definitely Daniel E. Dugdale. He came to Seattle on his way to the Klondike Gold Rush in 1898, and fortunately for us, stayed here and was tremendously responsible for popularizing baseball in Seattle.
Renaming the team the Seattle Braves, Dugdale started the league back up, and by 1903 had established a handful of local teams. In 1907, Dugdale, as chief operator of the local Seattle Siwashes, decided to build his team a new baseball park on Yesler Way.
And it was called the Bandbox because it had small dimensions. It was kind of in a little residential area. A lot of home runs were hit there. Not exactly a pitcher's park.
7 years later, Dugdale put Seattle baseball squarely on the map, building a second stadium, this time in Rainier Valley. Dugdale Field became the first double-decker stadium on the West Coast, and the baseball world started to take notice. In 1924, even the Babe paid a visit to the stadium during an exhibition game with local players. That same year, the newly named Seattle Indians won its first Pacific Coast League championship. The Indians went on to produce many star players, but by the early 30s, with the Great Depression gripping the country, the Seattle franchise hit hard times.
They weren't the most successful franchise. They only had that one pennant-winning year in 1924. A lot of good baseball, though. There was, I think, a bit of fan apathy at that point.
Baseball was just in an iffy position whether it was going to keep going or not back there in those days. And that was during the Depression. Things were tough.
To make matters worse, in 1932, Dugdale Park was burned to the ground by a local serial arsonist. The team was forced to move to Civic Field, located near Queen Anne Hill.
And that stadium was basically a dump. It was mostly dirt and rock. You'd slide into home and have to pick pebbles out of your hide.
With a blade of grass there, then it was like concrete out there. If they put a horse out there, he'd starve to death.
In 1938, beer baron Emil Sick bought the Indians franchise and changed the direction of baseball forever.
It's not an exaggeration to say that he really did save baseball in Seattle.
Sick immediately built a state-of-the-art stadium and virtually created a championship team overnight. He named his team the Seattle Rainiers.
Technically, it was after the mountain, not after his beer, but it was a nice coincidence.
Emil Sick was beloved by the fans and by his players.
And everybody wanted to play for Seattle here in those days because of him.
6 Seattle Rainiers produced some of the biggest names in baseball, including Fred Hutchinson and slugger Edo Vanni. The Rainiers went on to win several pennants and warmed hearts for fans for over 20 years.
I'd love to live them all over. Every day I went to that ballpark was a fond memory to me.
But with Major League Baseball moving to the West Coast, the Rainiers' time was slowly coming to an end.
It got to the point for Emil Sick, I think his quote was that it just wasn't fun anymore.
In 1969, Seattle got its first Major League franchise, the Seattle Pilots, with a new draft choice by the name of Lou Piniella. Unfortunately, the Pilots traded Piniella before the start of the season and went on to have a less than successful year. After just 1 year, the Pilots left Seattle and became the Milwaukee Brewers in 1970. It wouldn't be until after the creation of the Kingdom that Seattle would see professional baseball again. In 1979, Seattle baseball took another blow when Sick Stadium was torn down. Today, only a sign and a small memorial are left to honor the once beloved landmark, but the memories will live forever. For videographer Ethan Griffith, I'm Chris Cashman for The Bullpen Show.